This is my family history. This is the extended Granovsky family, but the million-dollar question is, how do we get to Canada? To answer that question, we must go to Odessa, which was a part of the Soviet Union but is now a part of the Ukraine. Rewind to 1880, where my great-grandfather, Abraham Granovsky, was born. Then, in 1886, my great-grandmother was born, Pearl Goldstein. Pearl Goldstein's father was a very successful lumber dealer, and she grew up quite wealthy. Pearl grew up very Orthodox, and she stemmed from a lot of Jewish scholars. Pearl had two sisters, on the right Leah and on the left Riva. Pearl also had two brothers, their names unknown. One brother died suddenly and mysteriously, the reason still unknown today. The other brother wanted to go to university for engineering but was turned away because he was Jewish. Due to this, he decided to leave home and renounced his Jewish background and was never heard from again. Abraham's father was a successful grocery store owner. My great-grandfather, along with a non-Jewish partner, opened up a soap factory in order to make money to support his family. This business was quite lucrative and times were going well for the entire Granovsky mishpacha. That is, until Abraham gets a knock on his front door. He opens his door to find the communist army. They tell him that he must give them his entire business or else they will kill him along with his entire family. Abraham soon found out that his so-called partner had sold him out to the communists. How did this happen and what was going on in Russia at the time? The year is 1914 and Russia is at war with Germany. The Russian army was made up of mostly the working class and peasants. The biggest problem was that they were not equipped or trained to fight. Fast forward 3 years to the year 1917, and now there were millions of Russian soldiers either killed or wounded in the war. Nearly all the Russian citizens are mad at Tsar Nicholas II for various reasons. The main reason that they were mad was because he got them into the war with Russia and Germany. A few other reasons why they were mad was because he took personal command of the army, food shortage, and political opposition. The first revolution took place in February of 1917 in Petrograd, the capital of Imperial Russia. They protested lack of bread due to the famine and rations. During this protest, the army was called to calm it down and shot and killed dozens of citizens. The Petrograd Soviet was the council for citizens and soldiers. During this time, more and more people were elected to represent their demands. The Tsar brought an end to the Tsarist autocracy and a new government was put in place. The new government was made up of two parties, the Petrograd Soviet and the Provisional Government. The Bolshevik Revolution. The Provisional Government was not a very popular one due to the fact that they made the decision to remain in the war and also did not give land to the peasants. Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks were a small group that was part of the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Party, which later became the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Lenin had a simple slogan that appealed to both the Petrograd Soviet and the people. His slogan was peace, land, and bread. Peace because that would involve their involvement in World War I. Land because it would go to the working class. And lastly, bread because it would solve the food shortage. On November 6th and 7th in 1917, the Bolsheviks led a coup against the provisional government. They stormed the palace, arresting the government, and put themselves in charge of Russia. The Bolsheviks then signed a peace treaty so they could exit the war just as promised in the slogan above. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was a peace treaty signed on March 3, 1918, between the new Bolshevik government of Soviet Russia and the Central Powers. This applies to my story because during this revolution, my great-grandfather's life was flipped over. Abraham's business was taken over by the new leadership with little to no compensation left. Just when it seemed like it couldn't get any worse, Abraham's sister was brutally murdered by the Bolsheviks as she was entering her house, which was located directly across from Abraham's. Abraham and Pearl quickly realized that the place they had once called home had rapidly turned to hell, and they needed to leave. They grabbed their 3-month-old daughter Sia and left through the back door. They hid between 2 apartment buildings for 3 weeks while their friends brought them food. Abraham had applied for a permanent visa to Canada from the USSR, but the quota for immigrants from the USSR was already filled. Abraham's original plan was to immigrate to the U.S. because of business opportunities that he had there, but the quota was unfortunately already full. The only way to obtain a visa would be to gain citizenship from Romania after 5 years. So in 1920, Pearl and Abraham with their daughter Sia went to Romania. On July 6, 1921, Bill Gronowski was born in Romania 14 months after his older sister Sia. On Bill's 5th birthday, the visas finally arrived. They got on a ship, went to England, and then finally arrived in Halifax, Canada on January 1927. When they got off the ship in Halifax, they took a train to Toronto and moved in with the Corrins, their cousins, on Augusta Avenue. On April 10, 1935, Abraham and Pearl's lives changed for the better when my spectacular grandfather, Irving Gronowski, was born. My grandfather attended King Edward Public School, and everything was going well, but that's not to say there wasn't anti-Semitism. My great-uncle was at the Christie Pitts riots when it happened. Thankfully, he ran up and hid in a tree and was not hurt, but it truly was a scary time for their entire family. For anyone who doesn't know what the Christie Pitts riots were, the Christie Pitts riots occurred on the 16th of August in 1933 in Toronto, Ontario. It was one of the worst outbreaks of ethnic violence in Canadian history with over 10,000 participants and spectators. The riot was sparked by Nazi-inspired youth flying a swastika flag at a baseball game. Although my grandfather Irving was not alive for the Christie Pitts riots, he grew up constantly hearing about it from his parents. Another tragedy that happened to Abraham and Pearl in 1933 was that their 3-year-old daughter Soybe, who was born in 1930, passed away. Tragically, Pearl never recovered from that. In February of 1948, the whole Gronowski family moved to Los Angeles, California, because of health problems that Abraham Gronowski was facing, specifically a bad back. While they were there, they opened up a plant for their family business, but eventually realized they wanted to move back, so in June of 1949, they moved back to Toronto. History of Atlantic Packaging. In 1946, Abraham and Phil Gronowski opened Atlantic as a small converting plant in downtown Toronto. In the 1950s, my grandfather Irving Gronowski joined, and the company is still thriving today. Irving Gronowski attended University of Toronto for mechanical engineering. And that's where he met his incredible wife, Toddy Hillman. Wait a minute, how did Toddy Hillman get to Canada? To answer that question, we are going to have to go to the place we just left, Romania. This is a letter written by Max Ingalls, my great-great-grandfather, and it says, "This is the story of my life. I was born in Romania, city of Iasi, in the year of January 15th, 1888. When I reached to be 7 years old, I entered public school, and in 4 years, I finished public. That was all a Jewish boy can afford, unless you were very rich. I have higher education, and by 12 years old, I learned the tailor's trade, and so on. And before I reached 20 years old, I had to join the army, but I fell in love with my wife and decided to get married." Max Ingalls was forced to conscript to the army, as were all the other Jewish men, so he decided to run away from Romania to Canada because he had family there. For a year and a half, Max had to leave his pregnant wife, Annie, at home. He promised he would come back for her, but since he didn't come for a year and a half, Annie thought that he had married someone else. Sure enough, he came back. From Max and Anna came my great-grandmother, Betty, who was a model and a big journalist. Here is Betty interviewing Ronald Reagan. Betty met her husband, Joseph Hillman, through mutual friends, and they quickly hit it off and got married. Joseph Hillman was born in Toronto, but his parents came from Galicia, Poland. The assassination of Tsar Alexander II, which was falsely blamed on the Jews, prompted a large scale of anti-Jewish riots called pogroms through 1881 until 1884. Pogroms also occurred in Russia. Jews were killed, broken into, property was destroyed, stuff were stolen. My family knew they had to leave. They went to Canada because of Betty and Joseph had 3 children. On the top, Rhoda, on the bottom, Toddy, and the little baby Hart. On June 10th, 1952, Toddy and Irving Gronowski got married. Joseph unfortunately outlived Betty by quite a lot, but got married to somebody named Rhoda Marks, my great-grandmother, and she is an incredible role model in my life. Toddy and Irving had 5 children: Bram, David, Shauna, Dara, And Leanne Granovsky. This is an ultrasound from when my mom was born.
Leanne had a great childhood and grew up at Bathurst in Bayview, which is where her grandparents still live now. She attended RHA for elementary school and Tannenbaum Chat for high school. She then went on to York and then Carnegie Mellon for business school. That's where she met my father, Daniel Rabinovich. Daniel immediately noticed Leanne, but he thought she was out of his league, so he tricked her to go on a date with him, and they got married in July 28th, 2000. In May 23rd, 2004, they had my older brother, Jacob. Then, in August 6th, 2006, they had Orly. On March 27, 2008, my parents' lives changed once again for the better when me and my twin brother Gabriel were born. And then finally, in November 26, 2012, Ashi was born. Me and my entire family are so grateful that our family history has brought us to Canada, because now we get to be surrounded by friends, family, Jewish ideals, and much more. I hope my future will make my family proud.